So David, he went out to war and he killed all of them. Now the first thing is war, but what's important to understand is that right before this, in 1 Samuel 18, Saul says in verse 17, "For Saul thought, my hand shall not be against him, David, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." So what Saul really wanted was that David going out to war would be his downfall, that the Philistines would kill David. But it seems like right now they went out to war and David won. Does that make Saul happy? No. So next we have a statement being made. What is the statement? He tells Jonathan, it's in verse 1, it says, "Now Saul told Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David." So a statement was made. Saul went to those who he trusted. He went to his soldiers and especially to his son, and he said, "Kill David." Now we know that Jonathan didn't kill David. But what's even more amazing is that God intervenes at this point using natural circumstances. Because just the chapter before, it says, "Now it came about that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself." God used the natural thing of the bond and the love between these two men to save David. So then what happened? A suggestion was made. Jonathan went to David, and he says in verse 2 and 3, "So Jonathan told David, Saul my father is seeking after you. Now therefore please be on guard in the morning." Now the term "be on guard" is actually the same Hebrew term used of the cherub in Genesis. Remember when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and then God put a cherub there to protect them from the tree of life so that they wouldn't live forever. And it says that the cherub guarded that tree. He made sure nothing would happen. So this is what Jonathan is telling David, hide. Make sure nobody sees you because Saul is after you. Now if the king's after you, you're pretty much as good as dead. And so he's saying, hide, stay in secret, and I will speak to my father. So he gives him the suggestion, and then Jonathan makes intervention. He says to his, as a synopsis, he says to his father, first of all, why do you want to kill David? He didn't do anything wrong. And second, David just freed us from the Philistines. He's doing a good job. Why do you want to kill him? So what did Saul say? Then he says in verse 6, Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan and said, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. We have a vow, and then the scene is over. He won't be put to death, and that's done. It says that David came back to be under Saul, and everything was as formally as it was before. So imagine if you are David. Imagine that you're this young man who's doing well for his country, who has a heart after God, who is even anointed by the prophet to be king. He was anointed. And then you have the king of Israel after to kill you. You would probably turn around, and I would turn around and say, God, what are you doing? What is happening? Why is Saul after me? And then Jonathan has to come, and he has to tell me to hide. And he has to go and make intervention for me. Jonathan, my friend, is the one who's doing all this. God, what are you doing? But I think that David was able to keep his faith and keep his love for the Lord because he saw the big picture, that God is in control. And so what David did, he realized that is God's hand working. So let's go into part 2 of the scene. We're going to continue on. So we went up to 1 through 7. Now in verse 8, it says, when there was a war again. We don't know how much time transpired between verse 7 and verse 8. But we know that it began with a war the first time. You had all these incidents. Now there was a war again. Bad news. There was a war again. David went out. He fought the Philistines and defeated them with a great slaughter, so they fled before him. Now, do you think this made Saul happy? After all, he vowed not to kill him, right? Well, he tried to kill him right after, actually. It says there was an evil spirit with Saul, and as David was playing his harp, Saul shot his spear at him, and David was able to get out, which was great. But now, again, a statement is made. This time, he says it only to his soldiers. It says, then Saul sent a message. He sent his messengers to David's house to watch him in order to put him to death in the morning. So David goes home, and Saul says, go hide there, hide in the bushes, hide wherever, and kill him right when he comes out. Now, you'll notice that this is different than the first time, because now Jonathan isn't really in the whole scheme. He isn't really in the plan. So Saul probably tried to put him to the side, make sure he didn't know about it, so no intervention was going to be made. So David goes home. Now, we know David's heart, because we're going to look at this in a little bit, but in Psalm 59, it's actually a psalm written by David right at this time, when the people were waiting to kill him. And we're going to see that he had his trust in the Lord even at this time. So Saul says, go kill them. And then there is, again, a suggestion given, the window. What happened is that he went home to his wife, Michal. It said, Michal's David's wife told him, if you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be put to death. So Michal let him out the window, and he fled. Now, how did Michal get wind of this whole situation? How did she know? Most probably, she was a daughter of Saul, and probably Saul told her in order that she wouldn't be hurt. And in order, if there was like an ambush on the house or something like that, he told her to watch out, maybe stay away or something like that, so she wouldn't be hurt. But she warned David, and David ran away. Now, first, I just want to say here that, again, God works in such an amazing way, because in chapter 18, it says that Michal loved David, and so Saul thought, I will give her to him that she may become a snare for him. Saul wanted his son to kill David, and David survived because God knit their hearts together. Saul wanted the Philistines to kill David, but David had success as a warrior because God blessed him. Saul wanted Michal to bring down David, but David was still saved through these natural circumstances. And every time Saul tried to bring him down, God used what Saul meant for evil to be for good. And at each of these points, David could have said, God, what are you doing? My wife has to shove me out a window in order to save my life. Aren't I supposed to be king? But he saw the big picture. He wasn't so focused on himself. He saw that God was working everything together for his good. And he was using natural circumstances to save him. Now, as a little side note, we might think that Michal is a righteous woman for having saved David, but as the text goes on, we realize that she is not. At the end of this little section here, the men, they come to the house and they say, let us see David. And what did Michal do? She took an idol and she put it in the bed. She dressed it up. She said, David's really sick. I'm sorry. Come back tomorrow. And they went back to Saul. They said, he's sick. And Saul said, I don't care. Bring him on his deathbed. I want to kill him. So they went back. They saw that it was an idol. And then Saul called Michal to himself. He said, why have you deceived me like this and let my enemy go? And what did Michal say? David said to me, let me go. Why should I put you to death? So she lied about the whole situation. She pretended like she was innocent. Not only this, but we may question, why does David's household, why does Michal have an idol? And I really enjoyed the New American Commentary. They said that the Hebrew word for idol is teraphim. And what this is, it's a connection with Saul. Because about 3 chapters before, Saul did something really bad. God said, kill all these people, and Saul killed many of them, but he kept a lot of the animals and so on for his good. And that was really bad. And Samuel went to him and said, your sin is like idolatry, where you care about this thing more. And so I believe that the author of 1 Samuel is making a connection with how Saul, he put his trust in the men, and he put his trust in idols and did what he did. So it's the same thing with Michal. David trusted in God, but Michal put her trust in that idol to save David. And we understand that just as Saul lost the kingdom, so in 2 Samuel, Michal wasn't able to give birth. She lost the pleasure of having children. So it wasn't as though she was a righteous woman, but God still used the situation, natural circumstances, to save David. So what happens is that David, he ran away, and he went up to Samuel. He went up to the prophet. Saul got wind of it. He sent his first group there, and what happened, they went up there to kill him, and then it says the Spirit of God came upon them, and they began prophesying. Okay, he sent his second group up there, the same thing, they began prophesying. The third group up there, they began prophesying. Saul went up there, and guess what happened? He began prophesying. Exactly. So what does it actually mean to prophesy? Many of us, we have this idea that prophecies are always these future events, something that's going to happen. But really, the office of a prophet is to speak the word of God. That's what was happening. So many say that as these men were going up, the Spirit of God came upon them, and they began proclaiming the word of God, and they were steered away from their wrong mission, so to speak, to kill David. And so finally that happens with Saul, and he begins proclaiming the word of God. It's a sincere act of worship. Now we see this in the past, of course, when Balaam, we know that Balaam was sent to Israel to curse them, and then God made blessings come out of his mouth. And so God is really in control of all these things. So do we see the similarities between the two parts? There's always this war, and then there's an intervention made, first with Jonathan, then with Michal. And then there's a suggestion given to hide or go out the window, and then finally this intervention where things are brought back together. And the reason I want to highlight this story is because I know that at my point, we said this before, if it were me, I would think, what is God doing? Why can't I become king? Why do I have to run away? Why do my friends have to help me here? Why does my wife have to throw me out the window in order to save my life? But David, we're going to see in Psalm 59, it's the next slide up here, these were his thoughts. But you, O Lord, laugh at them, those who are trying to kill him. You scoff at all the nations. Because David understood that God works mightily behind the scenes. So the way this affected me was, when I first went to Chicago, and I went to Moody, and people would ask, they would share stories how they got in, their applications, and I would always say, oh, this so-and-so professor got me into Moody. And looking back on that, I realized that God used that professor to get me into Moody. That God used situations to stretch me and to grow me, and most of the time I didn't notice God working the little things in my life. So even now, I think about the parents I have, the friends I have, the struggles I'm going through, the things that my wife says to me on ways that I could improve. And I just think God working in the little things and seeing him manifest himself, really. The hard thing is that we could get apathetic and we could get passive about the living God. You could focus on the end times, you could focus on what he's done, but the question is, what is he doing in our lives today? Because through this passage, you see that God is a lot more intertwined in our lives than we sometimes care to acknowledge, like myself. So I want to encourage you and ask you, do we acknowledge the little things that he's doing? The friends that you have, the situations you're put through, the struggles, because God is working with you. That is for sure. So I want to encourage you with that and be able to see God working in your life.
To get in touch with us, you can do so by telephone 1-888-685-5902, locally in Montreal 514-685-5902. You can also reach us through our website at www.arielcanada.com. Again, the phone number is 1-888-685-5902, or locally in Montreal 514-685-5902. Website address is www.arielcanada, all one word, ARIEL Canada.com. Be blessed. Shalom.